What's that?
And you lived to tell.
I did. I lived to tell the tale. They didn't have a lot of people out there picketing. It was a small con, and Lynchburg's a small town. I think there were maybe 10 people all total. So yeah, it wasn't very threatening. I was actually just talking about that yesterday with someone else who was there that year. So when did you realize that that cons were something that you wanted to keep going back to?
After that, I didn't, except until I started having pro sales. And I believe my first con was in the early 90s. I was writing at that point. So there were a couple of attempts to publish an analog, which ultimately bore fruit. But what happened earlier than that is that in those days, compared to today's highly diversified market, if you were going to write in something that was going to pay you a professional rate, it was probably showing up in the SFWA Bulletin's market reports. So I went there and I saw, oh, this is interesting. So I sent something off that I had sent off, as a matter of fact, to Stan Schmidt when he was running analog. And the person who got it said, I really like this story. I can't use it because I was sending it off for something for which it was sort of purpose-built. And he said, but I really like what you've done with space and the hard SF field to this. Could you write me something for this other serial? Well, the serial it could not get published in was, because they had already filled it, is the fairly little-known High Tech Wars. The series that it was published in, a little better known, is War World. The editor was John Carr, and the packager, of course, was Jerry Cornell. So that was my first publication, and then I had a couple of other things out there, and so my first con was actually Balticon when it was downtown, and I met right away at the very first Balticon, how lucky can you be, I met Bud Sparhawk. So awesome. Of course he's awesome. He essentially he is the personification of awesome. Yes. wherever that sort of deistic property is. He is its avatar, I guess you could say. And he was just a wonderful introduction to the entire con circuit. I also met Paul Levinson, and we're very much alike mind. And so I think our sushi habit, our joint sushi habit, began there or very soon after. And so I did cons for a little while, and then I got to the point where I actually had to terminate the science fiction entirely. Some of that was, actually that was really sort of a consequence of external features. So
is this because some of your government work?
No, nothing of the sort. So at this point I was doing about 50% of my income was coming from television, full-time, not half-time freelance, which was when in television, half-time freelance is like full-time freelance. About 20 to 30% was coming from games. I would do about 6 or 7 products a year for GDW, Game Design Workshop, hence defunct. And I was getting some from fiction. But what had happened is GDW, having seen my track record, has said they were going to use 2 of us for novelizations. They were using Mike Stackpole for some, and they had contracted with me for Traveler and Dark Conspiracy. Those are the ones I was going to do. At the same time, if anybody is familiar with the War World series, and I certainly don't expect that they are, that's been a while now. But one of the strange things that happened was Harry Turtledove, Steve Sterling, and Sue Schwartz. Essentially, you had the bad guys who were the Saurons. They were these sort of, cyber soldiers that couldn't be outsmarted and couldn't be beat. Except that's exactly what those 3 authors did to it.
Yeah.
And John Carr was sitting there saying, I don't know where to go. It's like we beat the big baddies. Well, it just turns out that the pieces of fiction that I wrote were the 2 that were in War World were about a group that had been, the super soldiers, the Saurons, were very, very motivated by genetic distinction. And they gave this terrible job to a bunch of essentially what they considered genetic low selectivities on the far coast. And so it's sort of like, go out and die, or if you do something well, bravo, and bring it back. But one of the things that what I did in the series was that they became aware of why this happened, and I said, because it had been established, there was an Eastern continent. I said to John, well, I'll put them on the Eastern continent because the resolution of the whole Sauron thing is 200 or 300 years later. No one knows they're there. they actually build up from ground. So we'll bring this new force in that they don't understand. We loved it, letter of intent. So there I was for about 8 months, feeling just as good as you could feel, and GDW changed hands.
Right.
They terminated all their old contracts. They would not promise new contracts, and in order to get the money, I had, because remember, this is mom and pop shop day. They had never heard of a kill fee. Well, let me tell you, going after them, that turned into arbitrage in New York, who then said, their lawyers told them, look, really, you don't want to go down this path. But they had to pay me in installments because they had gone into, they swung big at the fences, and they're not around to sing the song. But then at the same time, as for anybody who follows the field knows, all of the Jerry Cornell anthologies essentially stopped at the same time, and it had nothing to do with their profitability. The shared worlds also stopped. That meant my letter of intent remained only an unfulfilled intent, and that's not a contract. So that's, that was a different. But basically, I went from having, and then I had to give up my television job in order to anticipate writing the 3 novels. So I was busted. So Plan B was being a professor, and that's what I became.
So how long was Plan B before you got back to the writing?
So I managed to publish 2 things in analog along the way. But it went from 93 to 2008. And
what was that moment that made you go wholeheartedly back into it?
Oh, it was opportunistic. Basically, what happened is my wife works in academia, and she works on the fundraising side. So she got headhunted by Johns Hopkins, and she said to me, because I had a perfectly good job, perfectly secure, et cetera, and it was never going to really change very much. So she said, first of all, we discussed if we wanted to make a move. I thought it was a great thing to do, and she turned to me and she said, this might be the time to think about going back to doing what you've always wanted to do. And it's absolutely true. I knew I wanted to do this when I was 12, and there was no loss of intent during all those years. And so she said, well, maybe this is the time. And I said, well, I don't know yet. So that's, and then never looked back since then. And I was very fortunate, pretty much hit the ground running.
How did you get hooked up with Steve White?
Steve White, that is a con story where I'm going to have to redact some names, but including the brand name of several bourbons. I'm actually serious. So what happened was I met Steve at Ravencon, the first Ravencon I went to, and we did a panel on writing influences and such like this. And Steve came up to me after and he said, I didn't think anybody could ever make me think one positive thought, even entertain it, about William Faulkner. And if you know Steve, this is Steve, I love you, and totally true characterization. And he would maintain it, I think, to this day. So we stayed in touch, and he was of course, he'd been doing the Starfire series with David Weber. Yeah, like I'm going to forget David Weber's name. It's like my mother's name. I forgot that one. But at any rate, embarrassing moment. And this is my mother, whose name I can't recall. But at any rate, he had to, David, because David was just not busy at all, was just casting about for new projects. So he pulled out of the Starfire series, and Steve was working with a new collaborator. And this is where the names get redacted. And this was not, they got one novel out together, and to get the second one started was pulling, prehistoric hen's teeth at this point. And he used to say, I don't know, it drives me to drink, and that would be the signal for another round. And I always used to joke about, well, if you ever get tired and it doesn't work out, you know where I live. And Steve was he had seen some of my work and he liked it, but the whole thing was, understandably, he said, well, I've worked with David Weber. I'm not sure I'd ever really, after this experience, I'd ever want to collaborate again. So I think it was 2009. I'm closing my laptop. We're about to go away for 3 weeks where I would have had no internet connection at all in the Mediterranean. And there's that one little thing, it's back in the you have mail days. That sound. And I open it up, and it is an email from Steve, which says, I know we were joking, but if I was to ask you seriously, would you still have the same response? And I sat and I wrote, I think it would be wonderful. I'd be privileged to work with you. What an honor. I really would enjoy it. Yes, thank you. And inside, it was like, yeah, does a bear crap in the woods, you know? So
that was a bit of a foot in the door there.
It was indeed. It was indeed. I was a somewhat easy sell to Tony, simply because I did have the publishing creds. The War World series was very well known to her. That was carried by Caine.
She's very good at spotting talent.
Well, and then she makes mistakes like me. So, but I fooled a lot of people, so it worked out all well in the end. But that was how that started, and then that, in a sense, led to my working with Eric Flynn.
Yeah.
I met him.
You owed all to Ravencon then.
Pardon me?
You owed all to Ravencon.
I owe it all to Ravencon. Absolutely, absolutely.
I'll expend kind of the royalty checks.
Well, you have been getting it yet?
I have been
You got some
yet,
people in your organization with sticky fingers on it.